Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Welcome to our expert witnesses. Our last hearing was with CBO Director Schwagel. He was welcome, a very welcoming event at this committee, and unfortunately a rare opportunity for this committee to focus on critical broken budget process. It gives us a chance to talk to somebody that knows that process needs to be fixed, and a primary responsibility of this committee. In exchange for holding a CBO hearing at my request, I agreed to Senator Graham working with Chairman Whitehouse to put together today's hearing. We'll be discussing electric vehicles and barriers to the electrification of America's light-duty fleet, the Biden-Harris administration's unattainable goal of 50% new EV sales by 2030 has been on full display over the last 4 years. From the imposing expensive EPA regulations to doling out billions in EV subsidies for the rich, the economic detriment to the EV policy, to America's EV policy, is quite evident. Now, I don't want to give the wrong impression. EV technology is impressive and works well for some, but Iowans know that there are far more challenges to EV adoption that many care to admit. EVs best serve wealthier people who also live in or near suburban and urban areas. Perhaps the most prominent barrier to EV adoption is that EVs are uneconomical. CBO's February baseline set the record straight, telling us that the so-called Inflation Reduction Act's EV handout would increase the deficit by hundreds of billions of dollars. I also couldn't help but notice that the price of EVs rose immediately after the IRA's passage to absorb the bill's $7,500 new EV tax credit. These EV costs were then, of course, passed on to the consumer. Of course, now many had to be discounted because they haven't been able to sell them. And I've yet to hear a comprehensive plan to make EV owners pay into Federal Highway Trust Fund. EV drivers are currently free riding on the backs of the middle class. And although some states have instituted an extra fee for so-called fuel-efficient vehicles, making them even more expensive. There are many holes in the rapid EV transition fantasy. They include a lack of critical minerals needed to produce EVs, lack of transmission infrastructure needed to support their increased electricity demands, and our current reliance upon nefarious countries in the EV supply chain. According to the University of Michigan, the world would need to mine 115% more copper from 2018 to 2050 than has been mined in all of human history up until 2018, just to do business as usual. This copper mining doesn't even include the green transition. And the EV, they take 3 to 5 times as much copper as a standard vehicle. I hope we discuss where these critical minerals from the so-called EV transition will come from. China dominates the global critical mineral supply chain, accounting for approximately 60% of the worldwide production and 85% of processing capacity, and we struggle to permit federal projects here in America. From wind turbines to transmission lines to pipelines to hard rock mines. Left-wing environmentalists are holding up the permitting reform needed for the very EV expansion that they claim. The left claims climate crisis, but backs away from comprehensive reform when the environmental lobby comes calling. They also claim to care about air quality and environmental justice, but ignore the unreported and underreported particulate emissions from tires under the heavy weight of EVs. Legislators must do better, and I hope this hearing serves as a stepping stone for honest permitting of dialogue moving forward. As we grapple with environmental red tape, the Chinese are rapidly expanding coal power plants to fuel EV manufacturing boom. I'd like to welcome all today's witnesses invited here by Senator Whitehouse and Graham. And finally, Mr. Chairman, I request unanimous consent to put this article called "Copper Can't Be Mined Fast Enough to Electrify Vehicles." I thank you. Before you go on, I was thinking I mentioned a few inconsistencies in my opening remarks, but I think of others, and maybe it's being the adjective unrealistic or inconsistency may fit a couple things. But Iowa's the #1 producer of ethanol. We have 43,000 jobs in Iowa, and if we had every vehicle in the United States be EVs, you could see what that could do to the particular job that we created 40 years ago to produce a more environmentally friendly product than petroleum is. We have the inconsistency of the rainforest being hacked away to mine nickel in Indonesia. We have the inconsistency of people in the Congress that talk about we got to stop the use of child labor around the globe, and yet we have children mining cobalt in Congo. I mentioned transmission in my opening comment. The chairman mentioned transmission, but this permitting process is halted by environmentalists not wanting to cut red tape here in Washington, D.C. And then you have the silly posture of the Inflation Reduction Act appropriating billions of dollars for charging stations, and I guess to date we have about 8. So I just think there's a lot about this whole process that hasn't been thought out very well.